I wanted to get your thoughts on a completely different topic. This has very little to do with politics, and I think everything to do with American popular culture. There is a woman by the name of Lenore Skenazy, and I may be mispronouncing that, Skenazy. Maybe it's Skenazy. I'm not sure. She's mother of two in New York City. She is referred to as America's worst mom because she wrote a newspaper column somewhere between bragging and asserting that living in New York City, she wanted her 9-year-old son to know how to use the subway system. She taught him how to use the subway system, and she now lets him ride the subway alone. Everybody freaked out. And part of that freak out then led to her writing a book called Free Range Kids, How to Raise Self-Reliant Children. And she actually has now a TV show that's on the Discovery Life channel where she's helping bubble-wrapped kids come out of the bubble wrap. You know, like there was one of the stories that they talk about in one of the first episodes of the series, 10-year-old Sam. His mom wouldn't let him ride a bike. Oh, I'm afraid he'll fall and get hurt. His mother wouldn't let him cut up his own meat. Well, he shouldn't be eating meat. I mean, everybody should be a vegan, but nonetheless, Mom thinks I'll cut my fingers off. And he was not allowed to play rough sports like skating. And Sam says, I just want to do things by myself. The point, Peter Gray, a research psychologist at Boston College, says that the actual rate of strangers abducting or molesting children is very small, more likely to happen at the hands of relatives or family friends. And the statistics since the 50s, well, I'll quote from the New York Times, this piece in the Personal Health, Jane Brody on Health and Aging, Jane Brody writing for the New York Times. She says, experts say there is no more crime against children by strangers today, and probably significantly less than when I was growing up in the 40s and 50s, a time when I walked to school alone and played outdoors with friends unsupervised by adults. Now, first of all, in the 40s and 50s, the population of the United States was half of what it is right now. But there's no more crime now than there was then, particularly with regard to kids. And if anything, it's gone down. And I mean, I remember growing up in the 50s. I was born in 51. When I was a child, right, when I was 6 years old, and I went to 5 years old kindergarten, 6 years old first grade. We were living on Cleveland Avenue, and I was going to, I'm forgetting the name of the school, but it was some school in Lansing, Michigan. And I had to walk about a half a mile to and from school. And the first week or so of school, my mom walked me to school every day, and she was there waiting for me to pick me up. When we came home, we walked back home. We did not have two cars. My dad drove to work. And then after 2 weeks or so, Mom knew that I had it figured out. And as a 6-year-old, a first grader, I walked a half a mile through downtown Lansing, Michigan to go to school. I walked 4 miles to go to junior high school. Both ways, 8 miles altogether. I say this to my kid. Years ago, my kids, when they were younger, we were in Michigan, and I was like, I walked 4 miles every day, even in the snow, even in the winter, to go to school and all the way back. And they're like, yeah, right, Dad. So we stopped at my parents' house, set the odometer to 0, the trip meter, and drove to Walter French Junior High School where I went. And it was 4 miles, like 3.8, something like that, but close. Nobody thought twice about it. School got out. Everybody was walking. My friend Bill Thomas and I used to, when we were 7, 8, 9 years old, Bill got a BB gun, and we used to go down. There was this pond it was at least a mile from where we lived. There was a forest where a river went, it was a large creek or a small river went through it. I don't think it was big enough to have a name, or if it did, I never knew the name. We'd go down there and we'd dig up crayfish the first week that Bill had his gun, we went down and we shot frogs. And then I don't remember if Bill said it or my recollection is that Bill said it. He said, what if God is keeping track of all the frogs we kill? And we had like this serious theological discussion about it. we both went to the Methodist church down the street from us, and we decided, okay, we're not going to shoot any more frogs. And from that point to this, I've not shot any living thing since that point, since I was 7 or 8 or 9 years old, however old it was. But we grew up outdoors. Louise and her brother used to bicycle, literally across Michigan. They would go on bicycle trips that were like 3, 4, 5 hours, where they would travel 30, 40 miles. My friend Clark and I hopped a train in Lansing and ended up in Grand Rapids and and then hitchhiked over to and this is when we were 14 years old, and ended up at my Aunt Marilyn's house. Now, my parents were not happy about that, but nobody arrested them for not being bad parents. Nobody arrested me. My Aunt Marilyn cut my hair off. It was hysterical, but God bless her. I love her. She's still around. And the older sister of my father. But it's like we lived out in the world. And now we've got these bubble-wrapped kids and these helicopter parents, and the consequence of this is that everybody's afraid. Kids are not getting any physical activity. Obesity is 60% higher than it was among children than when I was a kid. And, I go into this conversation with a certain amount of trepidation, just like, when Neil and I were talking about the 60s, or the 80s, rather. Neil is younger than I am. He doesn't remember the 60s. He might not have even been around in the 60s, but I remember the 60s and the 50s. And there's a certain amount of, back when I was a young whippersnapper, I don't want to sound like that guy, right? I remember when I was a kid, my grandfather talking about, well, things were better when I was young. These kids today, they've gone to hell. Look at this long hair, they're smoking pot. That kind of stuff, only he said it with a Norwegian accent. I don't want to sound like that. But that said, I really think we're screwing up our child rearing practices. And then on top of that, this just I live in Washington, D.C. here. Maryland is right next door. And this from Fox News, of all places. A Maryland couple that believes in free-range parenting. That's what it's called. That's what my mother and father did, right? I would leave. If I wasn't home by dark, my mom would get upset. I'd get in trouble. And I remember one time when I was around 10 that I had stayed over at my friend Jerry Stamsky's house way, way too long. And as I was walking home, my mom was riding my bicycle up the street, crying, looking for me. I'll always remember that. It horrified me that I had so frightened my mom. But I was really late. It was like 10 or 11 at night, and I was a little kid. And that was it. So anyhow, a Maryland couple that believes in free-range parenting said that they are being investigated for child neglect after police picked up their kids ages 6 and 10 walking home alone from a park. And the Montgomery County Child Protective Services reportedly followed up and forced the parents to sign a safety plan acknowledging that they would not let the kids go unsupervised. I used to run a community for abused kids in New Hampshire. The first kid we did intake on was the daughter of her father by her sister. The second kid we did intake on had been tied to a pole in the basement with his brother. His brother starved to death. The neighbors smelled his brother's rotting body and called the police, and they rescued Tony, and he got placed in the facility that Louise and I had started. That's child abuse. Child abuse is not letting your kids walk 3 blocks home from the park to your house. Or do you think I'm wrong?